Hello and welcome to Umbral Dread. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, haunting stories that quietly pull you deeper into the shadows, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Settle in, let your body become still, and allow the sounds of the outside world to slowly disappear into silence. Tonight, something waits in the darkness, patient, unseen. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and drift into the depths of Umbral Dread. Story 1. When I was a kid, I used to run away the way kids do when they want the world to know they're upset. I'd pack a backpack with the most dramatic supplies possible. A blanket, a pillow, a stuffed animal or two, and maybe some animal crackers. Then I'd walk right past my mom like I was in a movie, making sure she saw me. I'd march to the end of the street, stick my thumb out like someone was going to pick me up, and stand there with my chin lifted like I was brave. And then, 5 minutes later, I'd get bored and go home, acting like nothing happened. I did it a lot, so many times that it became a routine. One time I actually did get picked up, which sounds worse than it was. It was the coach from whatever sports team I was on at the time. He slowed down, asked what I was doing, and then just drove me in a big loop right back to my house. No weirdness. Just a grown-up seeing a kid doing something dumb and correcting it. But I remember the feeling behind it. I remember wanting out. Not just out of my house, but out of my whole life. My parents, the tiny town, the same streets, the same people, the same stale air. I wanted to escape so badly that I practiced it like a game. Back then, I didn't understand that one day I'd actually follow through. I didn't understand that for 23 years. At 4 a.m. today, I did it for real. I ran away. Not like a grown man with a plan. Like a kid who finally got tired of pretending. Like the child I still am. That's the thing. Even now, even at 23, I'm still the most childish person I know. And I have 3 brothers who are in elementary school. I don't even know how to talk about them properly, tense-wise. Saying I have feels wrong because I'm not there. Saying I had feels wrong because, as far as I know, they're still alive and healthy in that house with my parents. I haven't checked. I don't want to call. I don't want to hear the disappointment in someone's voice, or worse, the relief. I've had severe ADHD my whole life. When I was little, I'd throw tantrums just to feel something happening, just to break the boredom in my head. I never learned how to focus. School was the worst. Teachers would talk, and it felt like their words were bouncing off a wall in my brain. I'd sit there trying to listen, trying so hard my jaw would clench, but 5 minutes later, I'd realize I hadn't absorbed a single sentence. By the time I was a junior, my parents pulled me out of public school and switched me to homeschooling. They tried to make it sound like a fresh start, a better fit. I didn't really care either way. I didn't have friends in school. I was the kid who ate lunch alone at the corner table. The kid who didn't fit into any group. Not the athlete, not the popular kid, not the funny kid, not the rebel, just the weird, quiet one people forgot was there until the teacher called attendance. So yeah, running away, living with your parents until you're 23 feels exactly as bad as it sounds. It's like being stuck in a room where everyone is pretending to be polite while silently keeping score. I always felt like my parents resented me. For some reason, they never said out loud. Not one big reason, just a constant low-level frustration with my existence. And it got worse when I didn't go to college. I didn't even apply. I didn't have a clear reason. It wasn't some brave anti-system decision. I just couldn't picture myself surviving campus life, surviving classes, surviving the way other people seem to glide through life like it was simple. My parents acted supportive, said they understood, said I could figure things out in my own time. But you can hear the truth under someone's words when you live with them long enough. The truth was, they were disappointed. The truth was, I was still in my childhood bedroom, still eating their food, still existing in their space like a stain they couldn't scrub out. So after 5 years of doing nothing, real nothing, the kind that rots you from the inside, I left. In the middle of the night, I grabbed my stuff and walked out, like I was sneaking away from a crime scene. I didn't have a grand plan. I didn't have savings. I didn't have a job lined up. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house one more day and pretend I wasn't suffocating. I walked to the Greyhound bus stop at the edge of town. It was empty, like it belonged to a world that had shut down. The streetlights made everything look flat and gray, like the color had been drained out. I sat on the bench and waited, staring down the road with the kind of dull hope you get when you've already burned the bridge behind you. The thing is, I didn't even know if a bus was coming. I had just gone there, like it was the only option my body could think of. And here's the weird part, the part I didn't realize until later. I can't remember seeing that bus stop at any other point in my life. Not once, not as a kid, not as a teenager, not driving by it, not walking by it, nothing. Yet the moment I decided to leave, I knew exactly where it was. I walked right to it, like I'd practiced, like something in me had been waiting for that moment. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. The bus stop existed. I was sitting in it. That was proof enough. A bus did come. I still don't know if that was luck or something else. It pulled up at 4:46 a.m. I got on, and there was no one else inside. No sleepy passengers, no people wrapped in blankets, just the driver. He looked middle-aged, maybe late 30s or early 40s, but there were thin gray streaks in his hair that made him look older in a certain way, like he'd been through too much too early. He had that look people describe as wise beyond his years. And I know how corny that sounds, but it fits. He wore all black, a plain black t-shirt, a black jacket zipped halfway, black jeans. And I know it's strange to notice someone's jeans. I know it's even stranger to focus on how they fit. But that's what I noticed. His clothes didn't look chosen. They looked assigned. Perfect in a way that didn't feel human, like he'd dressed himself based on an idea of what a bus driver should look like. I didn't see his shoes, but my brain assumed they were black too, because everything about him was black, like color didn't apply to him. He smiled at me. Not a huge horror movie grin, not some impossible mouth, just a warm, open smile. And still, it didn't sit right. He nodded and said, "Enjoy your ride, sir?" His voice was scratchy, like he'd smoked too much or screamed too much in his life, but it also had this weird, high-energy brightness to it, like a radio host who refuses to admit he's tired. I took a seat around the middle of the bus. I turned on my phone, trying to fill the silence with something normal. I checked Snapchat. No friends. I checked Reddit. No followers. I scrolled Instagram until my brain went numb, watching meaningless videos and ads like they could distract me from the fact that I just walked out on my life with no plan. Eventually, the internet started to feel like static. I put my phone down and stared at the back of the driver's seat, listening to the hum of the engine. That's when he spoke again. I almost jumped, which was stupid because I knew he was there, but the quiet had made me forget. "I was waiting for you to get off that damn thing so we could talk," he said, laughing a little. "How is your ride going, sir?" I pride myself on having the best possible service for my passengers. They always get off my bus with big smiles on their faces. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Not the words exactly, the certainty. The way he sounded proud of something he shouldn't be proud of. "Is that so, E?" I replied. I wasn't trying to start a conversation. I was just making a noise to end his sentence. "Yep," he said. "It's truer than night." I'd never heard that saying before. It didn't sound like a saying at all. It sounded like someone who knew what night really was in a way I didn't. We drove for another 30 minutes in silence. I watched streetlights fade into empty road. The world outside the windows looked unfamiliar fast, like my town had peeled away and something else had started. Then the driver spoke again. "Where are you from, sir?" he asked. "Just blank," I said, naming the town, the same one where he picked me up. And then for some reason I asked, "Where are you from?" The question left my mouth and immediately felt like a mistake. There was a pause. Not a normal pause. A pause that felt like the bus itself was listening. Like the air had turned its head to look at me. I was already regretting it when he chuckled. "Not from around here," he said, quieter than before. Then he added, "I come from a place you ain't never been." I don't know why I pushed it. Maybe because I was tired. Maybe because I've always been the type to poke at things that scare me just to see if they move. I tried to make it playful. "Oh yeah?" I said. "Try me." He went completely serious. "The underworld," he said. I actually laughed. It came out sharp and nervous. The kind of laugh you do when someone tells a joke that isn't funny. He didn't laugh back. "No," he said, voice low. "I'm serious." Then he continued, calm as anything. "You know those things you people call demons? I'm one of them." His voice had changed so fast. One minute, he was a cheerful bus driver. The next minute, his tone was dark and flat, like he was reading a fact off a card. I was sure it was a joke, and somehow I believed him at the same time. That's the only way I can describe it. Two truths sitting in my chest without touching each other. Then, just as quickly, he snapped back into brightness. "Nah, I'm just kidding, kid," he said, and his voice sounded shrill compared to what it had been, like he'd forced the cheer back into place. I laughed again, weaker this time. My hands felt cold. My mouth was dry. Something about the way he said kid bothered me. I wasn't a kid. I was 23. But on that bus, in that empty aisle, I felt small. That's about when things stopped making sense. My body went limp. Not slowly, not like I was relaxing. Like someone had turned off a switch inside me. My arms felt heavy. My head dropped slightly. My eyes struggled to stay open. The driver started laughing, not friendly now, but loud and wild. Like he couldn't hold it in anymore. He stood up from his seat, and the bus kept driving. I saw it clearly. He was no longer holding the wheel, no longer sitting in front, and still the bus stayed steady on the road like it didn't need him. My vision began flickering like a broken screen. The lights outside stretched. The inside of the bus seemed to breathe. The driver's silhouette looked taller than it should have been, the black of his clothes deeper than normal black. I tried to move. I couldn't. I tried to shout. My throat didn't work. Then everything went dark. I woke up in my bed, in my childhood room, in my parents' house. I sat straight up and screamed like I was being murdered. It wasn't a normal wake-up scream. It was the kind of sound that comes out of you when your body thinks you're dying. I heard footsteps, frantic, pounding down the hall. My bedroom door flew open. My parents rushed in. "What's wrong, James?" my mom asked. And this is the part where I almost want to laugh. Because I know how it sounds. I know how it reads. It was a dream. I never got on a bus. I never talked to a driver who claimed to be a demon. I never passed out in a seat while the bus drove itself into the dark. It didn't happen. I'm sorry. I know that feels like cheating. I know it feels like I dragged you along for nothing. But this is where it gets strange, because even though it was just a dream, my body didn't feel like it. My throat hurt. Not just dry sore from screaming. It ached like something had pressed there, like fingers had been around it. My arms felt heavy, like I'd been dragged somewhere. I looked at my parents standing in the doorway, and relief hit me so hard my eyes started watering. Then my mom smiled. Not the normal kind of smile. Not the it's okay smile. My dad smiled too, at the exact same time, and they didn't say anything. They just stood there, smiling like they'd been waiting for me to wake up. I wiped my face and tried to slow my breathing. It was just a nightmare, I said, more to myself than to them. Neither of them blinked. Their smiles stayed exactly the same, like the muscles in their faces had locked. I tried to laugh it off. You guys are being weird, I said. My mom took one small step into the room. My dad stayed by the door, still smiling, blocking the way out without needing to try. I glanced past him into the hallway. The lights were off. The house looked darker than it should have, and for a second I thought I heard something outside, far away, like the low hum of an engine idling. My mom tilted her head slightly, still smiling, and in a soft voice that didn't match her face, she said, "Did you enjoy your ride, sir?" My stomach dropped so fast it felt like falling. I stared at her. "What did you say?" My dad's smile widened by a fraction. His eyes looked too shiny, like they were wet, but not from emotion. Behind them, at the end of the hallway, I saw something that made my skin go cold. Not a person, not a shadow, just a shape, black against black, like a doorway where there shouldn't be a doorway. And in my head, as clear as if someone whispered directly into my ear, I heard the driver's scratchy, energetic voice again. It's truer than night. I wanted to run. I wanted to jump out of bed and sprint for the window, the door, anywhere. But my body didn't move right away. Not because I was paralyzed with fear. Because for half a second, I couldn't remember how to leave my own room. Like the concept of escape had been erased and replaced with one simple instruction. Stay. My mom took another step. My dad finally blinked, slow and deliberate, as if he was remembering how human eyes work. I opened my mouth to call for my brothers, but no sound came out. My mom's smile never changed as she said, quietly, almost lovingly, "No more running away." And then the lights in the hallway flickered, once like my vision on the bus. Just once, long enough for me to see, in that black shape at the end of the hall, the outline of a driver's seat, a steering wheel, a figure standing beside it in perfect black clothes. Then the lights steadied again, and it was just my parents in my doorway, smiling like nothing had happened, like they had always stood there that way, like I was the one being strange for noticing. I don't know how long I sat there staring at them. I don't know what I did next. All I know is this. I used to pretend to run away as a kid, and I always came back home because home was the safe place. Now I'm lying in my bed at 23, and I can't tell whether I ever made it off that bus at all. Story 2. I don't even remember how I found that job. I barely remember the posting. All I can recall is a short description that sounded like freedom to me at the time. A small motel, rural, free accommodation included. Back then I was still living with my mom, and every little argument felt like proof that I needed to get out. I was young enough to think any change was a good change, and desperate enough to ignore how strange it sounded. I called the number on the ad, expecting a normal conversation, maybe an interview, maybe questions about my experience. A man answered in a low, firm voice. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask about my background. He barely asked anything at all, just when I could start. I said I could start immediately. For the first time, his voice showed something like emotion. It jumped slightly, like I'd said the exact words he was waiting to hear. "Good," he said. "You've got the job." That was it. No paperwork, no email. No, "We'll call you back." Just a start date and an address. The whole thing should have felt like a scam. Part of me did feel that, but the louder part of me was already imagining a room that belonged to me, a place where nobody could tell me to keep my music down or ask why I wasn't doing more with my life. The directions to get there were simple, but they didn't make me feel better. You had to take an exit off the highway and follow an old forest road that looked like it hadn't been properly paved since the 1990s. The pavement was cracked and faded, with long stretches where it turned into gravel and then back into pavement again, like the road couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Trees leaned in from both sides. The deeper I drove, the less traffic I saw. After a while, I started to feel stupid, like I was driving into the kind of place people disappear in. I remember tightening my grip on the steering wheel and thinking, if this is fake, if this is some setup, I'm going to look like the biggest idiot on earth. But when I reached the address, the motel was there. It was small, one floor, made of concrete, painted a dark gray that looked almost black in the shade. The windows were narrow and set high, like the building didn't want anyone looking in or out. There was a tiny parking lot that could fit maybe 4 cars if people parked neatly. What really stood out was what it didn't have. There was no sign, no neon, no name, nothing that said motel or vacancy. If you didn't already know it was there, you'd drive right past it without even noticing. Nearby, there was a natural reserve, trails and wooded land, so I told myself that was the reason. Maybe hikers and hunters already knew about this place and used it as a starting point. Maybe it stayed off the radar on purpose. Still, it didn't feel like somewhere you just stumbled into by accident. The owner was waiting outside when I pulled in. He was a large man in his 50s, with thinning brown hair and a heavy face that looked like it had spent years not smiling. He wore a gray button-up shirt tucked into black pants. Nothing about him looked friendly, but he didn't look nervous either. He looked like someone who expected to be obeyed. He greeted me in the same low, stern voice I'd heard on the phone, and walked me through the building. There wasn't much to see. A narrow hallway, a line of identical doors, a small reception area that smelled like stale coffee and old air. He explained my duties in a calm, matter-of-fact way. Clean the rooms and the common areas. Take calls, check guests in and out, handle payments. It was basically every job in one, but he said it like it was normal. The last place he showed me was my room. It looked just like the others, only smaller. Musty blinds, stained carpet, a bed with sheets that at least looked newer than the ones in the guest rooms. The air had that old building smell, like damp dust trapped in the walls. I set my bag down and tried to sound casual. "Will I be the only one working here?" "Yes," he said like he'd expected the question. "But don't worry. The season hasn't started. There will be barely any guests. I'll get you a helping hand once the season kicks off. For now, you can manage it yourself." He said it as if he was doing me a favor, but the truth is, more than the workload. I was worried about being alone. I didn't say that. I just nodded. "You got everything?" he asked. "I think so." "Great. You know where my number is. If you need anything, call me." I live an hour away and can be here in no time. He took a small breath, then added, "We really value personal privacy here, so make sure to keep that in your head." I didn't realize I was making a face until his brow tightened. He stared straight into my eyes like he could see the exact thought I was having. "I really do mean it," he said. "Respect their privacy." "Yeah," I said quickly. "I will." "Good." For the first time he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He shook my hand, firm and cold, then turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed down the hall. A minute later, I heard his car start. Tires on gravel. Then nothing but the building settling and the wind outside. Over the next few days, nothing happened. I sat behind the reception desk and watched TV. The bell on the front door didn't ring once. The phone didn't ring either. I cleaned rooms that hadn't been used, wiped down counters that were already clean, swept the same hallway until I knew every stain on the carpet by shape. At first, it felt like a paid break from reality. Then it started to feel like I'd been put somewhere to be forgotten. On Friday evening, I was flipping through channels when the doorbell finally rang. The sound was so sudden, I almost fell out of my chair. I fumbled for the guest book, my fingers clumsy with surprise. By the time I got it open, the guest was already close to the desk. He looked about 30. Pale face, dark eyes that seemed deeper than they should have been. He was dressed in a long brown coat, a hat pulled low, and gloves. It was cold outside, yes, but the sun had been down for an hour and the air wasn't that bad. He looked overdressed, like he was preparing for something harsher than weather. "One room, please," he said. "Sure," I answered, trying to sound professional. "That'll be $40. Please sign it." He leaned over the book and scribbled his name in a messy rush. I couldn't make it out even as he wrote it. I turned to the wall of keys and reached for the one that made the most sense, something close to the desk. And before I could hand it to him, he spoke again. "If possible, may I get room number 7? I paused with the key in my hand. Room 7 was the one at the end of the hall, the farthest from the reception. It wasn't a big deal, but his request felt oddly specific. Sure," I said. "Thank you." He took the key and walked away. Only then did I notice the suitcase. It was huge, much larger than any normal overnight bag. He carried it like it was heavy, but his arm didn't shake. He moved as if the weight didn't matter. After he disappeared down the hall, I picked up the guest book and tried to read his writing. It was so bad it might as well have been another language. The next morning I woke up early, right around sunrise. I got dressed and walked to the reception, expecting I'd have to check him out at some point. The key for room 7 was already sitting on the desk. He'd signed the checkout time in the guest book, too, neat enough that I could read it. He didn't leave a note. He didn't say goodbye. It felt rude, but it also meant less work for me. I grabbed the cleaning cart and walked down to room 7. The smell hit me before I even opened the door. It was like someone had emptied an entire bottle of air freshener into the room and sealed it overnight. My throat tightened immediately. I started coughing and pulled my shirt up over my nose. It burned like strong chemicals. I stepped inside, expecting to see at least some mess. A used bed, towels in the bathroom. Something. But the room was spotless. I rolled up the blinds. The carpet looked the same as it always did. Dirty and worn, but no fresh stains. The bed sheets weren't disturbed. The bathroom looked untouched, like no one had even run the water. It was as if he'd rented the room just to stand in it for a while, then leave. I cleaned anyway because that was my job. I sprayed, wiped, changed sheets that didn't need changing, and opened the window until the smell faded enough that I could breathe without coughing. Then the motel went quiet again. The next week passed the same way. TV at the desk, Leaves starting to fall outside, long stretches where I didn't speak a single word to anyone. The silence got in my head. I started catching myself talking out loud sometimes, little comments to myself like I was trying to prove I still knew how to use my voice. It was Friday evening when the bell rang again. When I saw the brown coat, I honestly thought I was imagining it. My body reacted before my brain did. I almost fell out of my chair a second time. "Good evening," he said, the same flat tone as before. "Evening," I replied. "Back again?" I asked, forcing a smile because I didn't know what else to do. He looked at me from under the edge of his hat. His eyes held mine a little too long. Not angry, not friendly, just fixed. I swallowed and turned the guest book toward him. "Room number 7, I said like it was a joke. "Yes," he answered, low and calm. By the time I turned around again, he was already writing in the guest book. Another huge suitcase sat at his side. The next morning, his key was on the desk again. The checkout time was written neatly again. I didn't see him leave. I didn't hear his car. One moment he had been in the building. The next, it was as if he'd never been there. I grabbed my supplies and went to clean room 7. The air freshener smell was just as strong as the first time, and the room was spotless again. Bed untouched. Bathroom clean. At least that's what I thought until I pulled up the blinds. There were a few drops on the carpet, dark and wet-looking. They weren't big, just scattered like something had dripped. I dipped a sponge in warm water and scrubbed. The stains didn't come out. They spread. Or maybe they soaked in deeper. Either way, the carpet looked worse the more I worked on it. I switched to a stronger cleaner. Same result. The stains softened at the edges but didn't lift. They seemed to sink into the fibers like the carpet wanted to keep them. "Jesus," I muttered to myself. "What is this?" I scrubbed until sweat ran down my face. It didn't matter. The carpet was old and already ugly, but those drops stood out because they felt new. I gave up, changed the sheets, cleaned the bathroom again, even though it was already clean, and went back to reception with the key in my hand, trying not to think about it. The days kept passing in the same dull rhythm. TV, leaves, silence, boredom that turned into restlessness. Restlessness that turned into the kind of thoughts you can't talk yourself out of. When the phone rang on Wednesday, I nearly jumped out of my seat with excitement, like a normal human voice might pull me back into reality. "Hello," I answered. The owner's voice came through, low and stern. "Good evening. How have the past 2 weeks been? Is the work too much?" "No," I said. "We only had one guest over the past 2 weeks." "Oh, yes," he said, like he'd known that already. "I expected that. The season's over, so fewer people." "He's actually been here twice," I added, and immediately wished I hadn't. "The same man. Tall, brown coat, hat, gloves. Has he been here before by any chance?" Line went quiet for a few seconds. Not dead, just silent, like he was deciding how to respond. Then he said, "What have we said about respecting privacy?" "Yes," I said quickly. "Yes, I know. I didn't ask him anything. I was just wondering." Another pause. "Yes," the owner finally said. "He's been here before. Quiet. Good guest. We don't get many like him this time of year. Don't bother him. He doesn't like it when people are nosy." "Of course," I said. "I won't." "Good. If you need anything else, call me." He hung up. I stood there for a full minute with the phone still in my hand, staring at the key rack on the wall. The key for room 7 hung there like it was listening. By Friday evening, I had the key ready on the table, before the bell even rang. I didn't bother turning off the TV when the man walked in. He greeted me with the same cold tone. I slid the guest book toward him. He signed in, put the money on the desk, picked up the key, and walked down the hall without another word. That night, there was a movie on TV I couldn't stop watching. I closed the reception door hours earlier, but I stayed at the desk anyway, leaning forward in my chair like it mattered. The building around me felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes small sounds feel loud. It was around 1 in the morning when I heard something that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was the TV. I turned the volume down, but the sound didn't fade. It got louder. I muted the TV completely and listened, holding my breath without meaning to. It sounded like fingers digging through wet dirt. Then an irregular, crackling noise joined it. Not sharp like snapping twigs, more rubbery, like thick plastic bending the wrong way. Digging, crackling, digging, crackling. It had a rhythm, but not a human rhythm. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping the floor. The sound came from down the hall, from the direction of room 7. My mouth went dry. I took a few steps toward the hallway entrance, then stopped. I told myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe he was unpacking. Maybe something in the room was broken. Maybe he'd spilled something and was trying to clean it up. But the noise didn't sound like cleaning. It sounded like something being worked on. I swallowed hard, forced myself to walk back into the reception area, and turned the TV volume up again. I told myself that was the smart move. I told myself I didn't want trouble. I didn't want to be nosy. I didn't want to get fired and end up back at my mom's house with my tail between my legs. Still, curiosity and dread mixed together until I couldn't sit still. I turned the volume back down and stepped into the hall. The air felt colder there. Each step I took made the sound clearer, louder. The crackling sped up sometimes, then slowed again. The digging noise shifted into something like tearing. I was almost at the door when a floorboard creaked under my weight. Everything stopped instantly. I froze with my eyes locked on the door to room 7. My body went stiff, like I'd been caught doing something illegal. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then I heard movement inside the room. Footsteps. Slow. Back and forth. Back and forth. Like he was pacing in a tight circle. Every second, I expected the door to swing open. I expected his face under that hat, his dark eyes fixed on me. But the door stayed shut. The footsteps stopped. Then, as if nothing had happened, the digging and crackling started again. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and walked back to reception as quietly as I could. I turned the TV off. I went to my room and lay down, staring at the ceiling until my eyes burned. I thought about calling the owner. But to explain it, I'd have to admit I'd gone down the hall and listened. I'd have to admit I'd been nosy. The last thing I wanted was to lose the job, lose my room, and go back to my mom like a failure. So I said nothing. In the morning, the key was on the desk, as always, with the checkout time written neatly in the guest book. This time the air freshener smell had spread so far it reached the reception. It was thick and sweet in a chemical way, like it was trying to cover something else. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and went to room 7. The stains were all over the carpet now. Not just a few drops, more like scattered marks, as if something had dripped while being moved. I scrubbed until my arms ached. They wouldn't come out. They looked like they were part of the carpet now, as if the carpet had accepted them. For the next few days, even with the TV on, my mind kept drifting back to that sound. The digging, the crackling, the way it stopped the instant I made noise, the way he paced, like he'd known I was there without even looking. By Friday evening, I felt sick with anticipation, like my body had learned the schedule before my brain could argue. The man returned at the same time as always. Same coat, same hat, same gloves. But his face looked different, slimmer, more drawn. More, like the skin had tightened over his cheekbones. It could have been the lighting. It could have been stress. But when he looked at me, his eyes seemed brighter somehow, like there was more space behind them. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep myself from asking what he was doing in that room. I didn't ask. I just handed him the key, turned the guest book around, and watched him sign in with that messy handwriting. He picked up his suitcase and vanished into the hall. Less than an hour later, the noises started again. Digging, crackling, louder than before, like he wasn't even trying to keep it contained. I turned the TV volume up as high as it would go, but the sound still pushed through, thick and steady, like it was coming from inside the walls. I sat at the desk, pretending to organize pens, tapping them against the table, anything to keep my hands busy. My eyes kept sliding toward the hall, toward that end door. Then the air began to change. A musty smell crept in, damp and heavy, like wet leaves left too long in a closed bin. It didn't smell like normal mold. It smelled older than that, like earth that had been dug up and turned over. The longer I sat there, the more it filled my throat. "What the hell?" I whispered, barely moving my lips. I stood up, and my legs felt too light. I walked toward the hall, slow and careful. The smell grew stronger with every step. It made my stomach roll. There was also something else. Warmth. A faint heat, like standing near an open oven, drifting out from the direction of room 7. As I rounded the corner, my breath caught. The door to room 7 was open. Not wide, just cracked enough to show a thin, dark slice of the room beyond. A few inches of space. Enough to see something if you got close. I looked back over my shoulder, even though I knew there was no one else in the building. Still, instinct made me check, like I expected to see the owner standing there, or another guest, or someone who'd been watching me the whole time. The hallway was empty. The sounds coming from the room were louder now and closer. I could hear that tearing, that wet digging, the crackle, like thick material snapping in slow motion. I moved toward the door as carefully as I could, placing my feet softly, watching where I stepped so I wouldn't hit another loose board. The warmth grew stronger. The smell made my eyes water. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it was pushing against my ribs. The owner's voice echoed in my head. Respect their privacy. Don't be nosy. But the crack in the door was there, waiting. I stepped closer and leaned in. At first I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The room was dim. The blinds were down. Shadows moved on the floor like something was shifting low to the ground. I saw the suitcase, his huge suitcase, open, and there was something inside it that didn't fit in my brain, something that looked wrong in a way I can't fully describe, like the shape kept changing the second I tried to focus on it. A small movement near the floor, a shadow sliding, something pulling itself. Before I even realized it, a gasp slipped out of my mouth. The noises stopped. The man turned toward the door. For a split second, we just stared at each other, through that crack like two animals caught in a trap. Then his face changed. His mouth opened too wide, and he made a sound that wasn't a shout and wasn't a laugh, something sharp and ugly that scraped through the hallway. And then he smiled. The smile was the worst part because it wasn't friendly and it wasn't human. It was a reaction, like he'd been waiting for me to look. He started crawling toward the door. I stumbled back, my feet sliding on the carpet. I couldn't stop staring at him. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt that awful, frozen pull of not being able to look away even when you know you should. He reached the doorway, grabbed the frame, and pulled himself upright in a single smooth motion, like he weighed nothing. I turned and ran. His footsteps came after me, but not fast, not rushed. slow, steady, like he knew he didn't need to hurry, like the outcome was already decided, and he was just enjoying the walk. I reached the reception area, shoved the glass door open, and sprinted into the parking lot. My car keys were buried deep in my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab them. I dropped them, and they bounced down behind the driver's seat. I practically dove into the car, reaching under the seat with frantic fingers until I found them. I jammed the key in, started the engine, and slammed the gas pedal to the floor. Gravel sprayed behind me as I shot out of the lot. In the mirror, I saw him reach the spot where my car had been. He stopped there and stood still, watching me go, not chasing, not waving, just standing like he'd carved himself into the air. The drive was a blur. I don't remember turns or signs. I just remember the dark stretch of road and my own breathing, too loud in the car, and the feeling that if I stopped moving, something would catch up. I didn't slow down until I saw the first open gas station, glowing like a lifeboat. I pulled in too hard, parked crooked, and stumbled inside like my legs had forgotten how to work. There was an attendant behind the counter. He looked up, eyes narrowing with concern. "You okay?" he asked. I tried to answer, but what came out wasn't real words, just broken sounds. My throat felt locked. He didn't push me. He disappeared for a minute, then came back with a coffee and a hot dog like he'd decided food and heat were the best first aid he could offer. I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, holding it like it was the only solid thing left in the world, and stared out the window at the tree line beyond the pumps. Even from there, the dark woods looked like a wall. The attendant sat down across from me. He opened his mouth like he was about to ask what happened, maybe about to tell me I should call someone. Then the phone behind the counter rang. He stood up. "Sorry," he said, and went to answer. I watched him from the table, my stomach still twisting, my ears still half listening for digging and crackling that wasn't there. A moment later, he leaned around the corner and looked at me. "Are you Mr. Blank?" he called out. "A motel owner is asking for you." The words hit me like ice water, because I hadn't told him my name, and I hadn't told anyone where I was going. If you want, I can expand this into a full 2,000-plus word version. Same plot, same simple English, smooth flow, by continuing from the gas station call and building out what the owner says, why he knows your location, and what forces you to go back. Story 3. There is nothing for me to do here, and I honestly feel like I'm going mad. I can't face Rebecca. I can't face the pity in her eyes, or the anger, or the way she looks at me like I'm a problem she can't solve. And these doctors with their polite voices and their little clipboards couldn't tell their arses from their elbows. They listen just long enough to decide what box I belong in, then they nod like everything makes sense. One of the nurses told me I should write things down. She probably meant a private journal, something to process trauma. I doubt she meant I should put it online, let alone on the same kind of website George used to post photos of his garden. But I'm stuck in this place, and I can't sleep, and the story keeps circling my head like a fly that won't leave. So I'm writing it. If no one believes me, fine. At least it will be out of me. At least I'll know I said it plainly one time in the right order. It started a few days ago. I wish I'd listened to my instincts. I don't think I could have saved George. Not really. But maybe I could have saved myself from what came after. Maybe I could have found him sooner. Maybe I could have made someone listen before the whole world turned on me. George and I were married for almost 40 years. It wasn't always easy. He could be stubborn in a way that made you want to scream, and he could be frustrating because once he decided something, that was it. End of discussion. And then there was his work. It did something to him over the years. I knew it did. You can call it stress or trauma or just time. but I watched it wear him down like a weight that never came off his shoulders. I struggled too. People forget that part. George would be away for long stretches, sometimes years, with only short leaves. And I was home raising Rebecca alone, trying to keep life normal while not knowing if my husband would come back at all. I lived with that quiet fear for decades. It doesn't go away just because the war ends or a posting ends. It stays in your body. Then he retired nearly a decade ago, and things finally softened. We moved to a beautiful little house with a few acres of land. When we first arrived, the property was overgrown, more wild than garden. But George couldn't stand idleness. He needed a job. He needed something to fix, something to build, something he could point to at the end of the day and say, "I did that." I used to stand at the kitchen window and watch him work. Over the months, he turned those messy woods into something like a private paradise. He planted apple trees. He dug beds for tulips and rose bushes. He made little patches of wildflowers. For the butterflies, he always said, like it was the most important thing in the world. Then he built his shed. I told him it looked awful, like a giant gray box dropped in the middle of all his lovely work. He insisted he needed a place for his man hobbies, which was his way of saying his trains and tools and whatever else he collected. In the end, I let him have it, because that's what you do when you love someone, even when their projects annoy you. But I hated that shed. I still hate it. If I ever get out of here and I ever get back to that house, I swear I'll tear it down with my own hands. After George retired, life became a set of routines. He would wake me with tea. I'd make breakfast, always porridge for both of us, and then a bacon sandwich for him because he insisted he needed something proper. He would go out to the garden or into the shed to play with his trains, and I would do the housework and then sit with a book or the television. The same pattern, day after day, year after year, until a few weeks ago when the routine started to slip. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when I woke up feeling strange. It took me a moment to understand why. I had slept through the whole night. That almost never happened. George always got up at least once to use the bathroom, and I'm a light sleeper. I can count on one hand the times in the last few years that he hadn't woken me at least once. Still, I wasn't frightened at first. Just groggy, I was blinking at the gray light coming through the curtains when George came in with my key. "Morning," he said. I grunted, my throat dry, and took the mug. George had never been a handsome man, not in the way people mean when they say it, but I'd always loved his smile, especially in the mornings. That smile had carried me through some very hard years. That morning, when he smiled, I felt nothing. The tea tasted wrong, too. Not poisoned or anything dramatic, just wrong. Too sweet. The wrong kind of sweet. I made a face without meaning to. "What's wrong?" he asked, and his smile slipped. "How many sugars did you put in?" I asked. "Two." "Two?" I repeated, and I know I sounded nasty, but I couldn't help it. Something inside me had gone cold. "Yes." "When have I ever had 2 sugars?" I pushed the mug back toward him. 3. Always 3. Go make it properly, and maybe think about seeing a doctor. Probably dementia. He let out a sharp laugh and walked away with the mug. I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic. People make mistakes. People forget small things. But 40 years is a long time. 40 years is long enough that a mistake like that doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like a crack. I got dressed and went down to the kitchen. I was just getting the saucepan out for porridge when George stuck his head in from his little office. "No porridge for me this morning," he said. "How about something more substantial? Are there sausages left?" I opened the fridge. There were 4 sausages left from last night. "Yes," I said carefully. "Sausage and bacon sandwich, then." "Perfect," he said, and he smiled again. Again, it did nothing to me. It didn't pull a smile from my face. It didn't warm my chest. I just felt a flat unease, like I was watching someone pretend to be my husband. I made my porridge while the rain eased, butter and honey the way I like it. Then I made George's sandwich. 3 rashers, 3 sausages, brown bread, HP sauce. I carried it into the office. He was sitting at his computer, frowning. "What?" I asked, stepping closer. "Oh, nothing," he said, "just thinking." He was staring at an online listing for yet another model train, one of those expensive German ones. A Fleischmann, I think. "That's rare," I said. "Going to buy that one?" He turned to me and smiled, that same hollow smile. "Maybe." It'd look great on the layout, wouldn't it? I looked at the screen and felt my hands clench without me telling them to. "You might want to check again," I said. He leaned toward the monitor, confused, and I watched his face as the information registered. That train was N-gauge. George's entire layout, his pride and joy, was HO. He'd spent years building it. He knew every piece. He could talk about it for hours. He would never make a mistake like that. Not casually, not while smiling. Something was wrong, I knew it. Then the way you know you're about to be sick, before you actually vomit. The rest of that day passed without much happening, mostly because I went into town. I told myself I was running errands, but looking back, I think I just wanted to get away from the house. I wanted to be around other people. I wanted the normal world to rub off on me and make this feeling go away. Dinner became another crack. Around 5, I called George. "Yes, dear?" He answered. "I'm in town," I said. "Fancy a curry tonight? I can pick it up on the way back." "Sounds lovely," he said. "I'm feeling like a chicken tikka madras, 4 naan, too." My lips tightened. "Right," I said, and I hung up. A man's curry order does not change. It just doesn't. George always ordered a Buna. Always. If he was feeling adventurous, maybe a Rogan Josh and 4 naan was ridiculous. George could barely finish one when I got home. He ate like a starving animal. He didn't just finish his 4 naan, he ate most of the rice. Then he started eating my korma because I'd lost my appetite watching him. He shoved food into his mouth too fast, barely chewing. The sounds were wet and sloppy. Worse than that, he used his hands. George was old-fashioned. George used a fork even for chips. I sat there with my back straight, lips pressed tight, a heavy feeling on my chest. I kept looking at his face, waiting for some familiar expression, some sign that this was my husband having a strange day. But he wasn't having a strange day. He was being strange in a way that felt like a performance. After dinner, while I loaded the dishwasher, he went out to his shed. I stood in the kitchen with my hands in soapy water and realized I didn't have a choice. I had to call Rebecca. She answered on the 3rd ring. "What?" she said. "Is that any way to talk to your mother?" I snapped, because fear always makes me sharper than I mean to be. I heard her sigh and shift around. "Mom, why can't you just text like a normal human being?" "Oh, is speaking a crime now?" I said. "Maybe I want an actual conversation with my only child." There was a pause. I moved to the sink and stared out into the dark garden. Tree limbs twitched in the wind. In the distance, there was a warm glow from the shed's single window. "Mom," Rebecca said, exasperated, "it's a work night. I'm tired. I really don't want to do this. Can I talk to Dad instead?" "He's why I'm calling," I said. Her voice changed slightly. "Is he all right? Has something happened?" "Now you care," I muttered. "Happy to talk to your father. Just not your mother, are you?" "I'm going to hang up," she warned. Talking to her always felt like pulling teeth. Even when she was a child, she was stubborn. As an adult, she'd sharpened it into something mean. "No, Rebecca, listen." I forced myself to slow down. "Your father has been acting strange." Another sigh. "He's always been strange." "No," I said. "Not like this. He's been scaring me." That got her attention. I could hear it in the way she breathed. "What do you mean scaring you?" she asked. "Has he been violent?" "No. Of course not. Don't be stupid." My voice broke a little. "He's just different." Now she sounded annoyed again. "Mom, tell me what you mean. No riddles." I told her about the tea, the sugar, The curry order, the train scale. I even heard myself listing the details like I was building a case, like if I explained it perfectly, she would have to understand. When I finished, there was silence, so long that I thought she'd hung up. Then she said, "Mom, you're just being weird, like always." Her voice was tired and flat. Sometimes they forget stuff. "I'm sorry we can't always be exactly who you want us to be." Then she hung up. I stood in the kitchen holding my phone, staring into the dark, feeling small and alone in my own home. That's when I noticed him. He was standing at the shed window, backlit by orange light, a George-shaped silhouette watching the house, watching me. I don't know how long he'd been there. It could have been seconds. It could have been minutes. My skin went cold and my breath caught in my throat. He stepped away from the window, out of sight, like he'd been hiding. It took me a long time to calm down. I turned the TV on just for noise. I poured myself a glass of wine, then another, trying to drown the feeling that the house wasn't mine anymore. When I went to bed around midnight, I went alone. That wasn't unusual. George often stayed in the shed late, tinkering with something, and he'd come to bed whenever he pleased. I was drifting in that space between waking and sleep when I heard him come in. I was facing away from the door. Normally, I barely reacted. That night, the hairs on my neck rose. My heart started pounding hard, like my body had recognized the threat before my mind caught up. I heard him undress, the belt buckle, the bathroom door, running water, the toothbrush. Every sound was normal, and every sound felt wrong. Then he got into bed, and I knew, in the deepest part of me, that he wasn't my George. I felt his heat as he pressed against my back. I felt arms wrap around me. I shuddered because the touch didn't feel familiar. The breath on my ear didn't feel like George. It felt like a stranger wearing his skin. Then it whispered, soft as a secret, "I killed your husband." I don't know how I slept after that. Maybe my mind simply shut down. Maybe my body did what animals do when they can't escape. When I woke, my stomach felt sick and hollow. The sun was shining, birds singing as if nothing in the world was wrong. There was a knock at the door. "What?" I called, my voice thick. "May I come in, dear?" a voice asked. I was still groggy, and for a moment I was sure the night before had been a nightmare, one of those vivid ones that clings to you after waking. I said yes. George walked in with tea. I felt the sickness hit me so hard I thought I would vomit in the bed. Then he smiled. It was George's smile, the real one, the one that belonged to our mornings. My chest tightened with confusion as I took the mug. I drank. 3 sugars. Just like always. "You scared me a bit yesterday," he said. "I scared you?" I asked, and my voice came out thin and strange. He chuckled. "Yes, you really weren't well. Having a little episode, I think." I frowned. I wasn't sure what was real. Yesterday I'd been certain he wasn't himself. But now he looked right. The tea was right. The smile was right. And yet, the curry, the breakfast, the train listing, those hadn't been dreams. Those had happened. Or had they? Was Rebecca right? Was I just rigid, expecting the world and everyone in it to behave exactly the way I thought they should? I got up, got dressed, went downstairs, and made breakfast. This time he didn't ask for anything odd. Porridge for both of us. A bacon sandwich for him. The normal routine. I started to feel almost steady again, like the world was clicking back into place. George smiled as he reached for the back door. "Going out?" I asked. "Yes," he said, checking the buds. Apple trees must be near blooming. I watched him move through his garden, pausing at each apple tree, examining the little brown knobs on the branches, the way he always did. He looked like George out there. He moved like George. He belonged to that place. For a moment, I even considered calling Rebecca to apologize for bothering her, for being dramatic. Then George came back in, and I carried his breakfast into his office. And everything broke. He didn't eat like George. He tore at the sandwich with both hands, ripping chunks off like he was feeding. He shoved bread into his mouth in a steady stream, alternating hands like it was a rhythm. Then he lifted the porridge bowl in both hands, ignored the spoon completely, and drank it like it was water. He wiped his mouth and turned to me. He smiled. But this smile wasn't George's. It had no warmth, no kindness, no love. It was the smile of something that wanted me to see it clearly, something that enjoyed my fear. I fled out of the office. I can't really run at my age, but I moved fast. I rushed out the front door, got into the car, and drove. I didn't fully come back to my senses until I was halfway to town. I wasn't mad. I wasn't imagining things. George, my husband, had to be dead, and something else was wearing him. It was still early when I parked outside the police station. I sat in the car for a moment, breathing through my nose, trying to plan how to say it without sounding insane. Inside, the station smelled like damp carpet and old coffee. The lights flickered slightly overhead. Everyone looked young. Everyone looked tired. I hadn't been inside a police station in decades, and part of me wanted to turn around and leave. But I didn't. I waited until a tired-looking young policewoman called me to the desk. How do you explain that your husband is missing when someone who looks exactly like him is at home, acting like he belongs there? I did my best. I told them something was wrong. I told them I felt unsafe. I tried to keep it simple and reasonable, but the more I spoke, the more I could hear how it sounded. They moved me from one officer to another, like nobody wanted to hold my story for too long. Eventually, I ended up with an overweight, bald sergeant with a red face and a patient expression that felt like pity. "Look, ma'am," he said slowly, "if you feel something's the matter with your husband, you need to talk to him. This really isn't a police matter." Anger rose in my throat. I'd spent 20 minutes being passed around like a nuisance. "Is there anything you can do?" I demanded. "I refuse to leave unless you help me. It's not safe at home." He sighed, stood up, and rubbed his eyes like I'd given him a headache. "The most I can do is send someone out for a welfare check." "A what?" "It means a constable will come to your home address and check everyone is all right, that's all." "But you'll come," I pressed. "To the house?" "Not me personally," he said. "But yes, someone will be dispatched." "When?" "As soon as we can," he said. "About an hour. Now, please, we have important work to do. If there's nothing else, I have to ask you to leave." It wasn't much, but it was something. If police officers saw him up close, maybe they'd notice what I'd noticed. Maybe they'd feel it. Maybe they'd see the way his smile didn't match his eyes. On the way back, I stopped at Tesco's because I didn't know what else to do with myself. My hands were shaking, so I bought the first thing I saw and sat in the car park with a soggy prawn mayonnaise sandwich that made my stomach churn. Clouds rolled overhead, dark and heavy, turning the day into early twilight. Soon, I was driving again, trapped behind a dirty white van, then boxed in by hedgerows as the road narrowed toward my home. When I turned up my drive, I felt like I was driving into a closed fist. Just a few minutes, I told myself. The police will be here. I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them, but before I could unlock the door, it opened from the inside. And there it was, wearing George's face. It ushered me in with a hollow smile. "Welcome home," it said. George would never say that. Not like that. Not as if he was rehearsing. As I turned to close the door, I saw a police car coming up the drive. Relief hit me so hard it almost made me weak. I swung the door back open and gestured wildly. 2 officers stepped out, a young man and an older woman. I didn't recognize them from inside the station, but they exchanged a look the moment they saw me, like they'd already decided what kind of situation this was. The older, shorter policewoman went straight to George. "Good afternoon, Colonel," she began. The thing smiled and cut her off smoothly. "Please, I'm retired now. Just George is fine." The woman nodded. "Right. Your wife came into the station earlier. She requested a welfare check." She glanced at me, then back at him. "Some sort of domestic trouble?" It nodded, putting on a concerned look. Ah, I see. You'll have to forgive her. She's not been quite herself recently. It shrugged. Age catches up with us all. The woman's face softened with sympathy. Something inside me cracked. Can I speak with you privately? I blurted, and even I could hear the sharpness in my voice. The policewoman frowned. The young policeman stepped closer, cautious. Of course, she said. Would you like to step outside for a minute? I stepped out and closed the door behind me. The frosted glass blurred the shape inside, but I could feel it standing there, watching. That is not my husband, I said. The policewoman blinked, confused. Her hand drifted toward her belt like she wasn't sure what to expect. What do you mean? We have him on file as... It looks like him, I said. It sounds like him, but it isn't George. The two officers shared a quick look, the kind people share when they think someone is unstable. Last night, I continued, forcing the words out, it told me it had killed George. I tried to steady myself. I tried to breathe in a way that didn't make me sound hysterical. They didn't believe me, not truly, but they could see I was frightened. They could see something was wrong even if they thought that something was my mind. I opened the door. The blurred figure was still there, waiting. As the door swung wide, it smiled easily, like it had been hosting guests. "Excuse me, George," the young officer asked. "May we have your permission to enter the house?" The policewoman added, "It's only that your wife seems unsettled. If we can just have a look around, perhaps that'll help." It stepped aside and spread an arm in a welcoming gesture. Inside, they looked through the living room. Their eyes moved over the photos on the mantel. Me and George when we were younger. Rebecca as a child. The three of us at her university graduation. George in uniform, medals across his chest. George in the garden holding a trophy from a competition, smiling. I watched the officers look from the photos to the thing standing in the room, then back to me. They spoke quietly to each other as it moved around the space like it owned it. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. My body stiffened. The breath at my neck was wrong, too close, too familiar in the way a predator is familiar with its prey. A whisper slid into my ear. "No one will ever believe you." My voice came out loud without me planning it. "What did you just say?" The officers turned, puzzled, looking from me to it. It smiled again, calm as anything. Its hand squeezed my shoulder gently, but the grip felt like pressure in a butcher's hands. "Testing meat," I said. "I'll do whatever it takes to help you." It said smoothly. Then it glided toward the officers. "Is there anything else I can do to help, officers?" The young man spoke quietly into his radio. The policewoman shook her head, and my stomach dropped as she spoke. "It's obvious you have everything in hand," she said. Then she turned to me with a look that made me feel small. "You should probably get her seen by someone as soon as possible." The thing tilted its head toward me. "Yes, she's had problems in the past. Hopefully a doctor can help her and put a stop to these silly notions." "Exactly," the policewoman agreed, like she was talking to a reasonable husband dealing with an unreasonable wife. The young policeman nodded at the thing. "We've got her in our system now. If she has problems and comes back to the station, she won't waste more resources next time." The impostor walked them to the door, acting grateful. "Thank you so much for coming," it said, the perfect host. Then it turned to me, grin wide. "Well, dear, aren't you going to say goodbye to the kind officers?" I stood beside the monster at my front door while rain started to fall harder. My chest felt tight, my hands shook. I looked at the policewoman one last time. "Please." I choked. She smiled sadly and waved. Then they got in their car and drove away, slow and calm, as if they'd just handled an ordinary call. The moment the car turned down the drive, the voice beside me went cold. "Don't you see?" it said. "No one believes you. They never will, not even your own kin. Whatever you try, you're mine now." I ran into the house. Behind me, I heard a sound like a neck moving too far. I looked back just long enough to see its head twisted at an impossible angle, eyes still on me. In the kitchen, I yanked the big carving knife from the block and spun around, pointing it at the thing. "Stay back," I said, and my voice shook. "Whatever you are, whatever game you want to play, I've had enough." It walked toward me calmly, smiling, but the way it carried itself wasn't George. The posture was wrong. The confidence was wrong. It moved like someone wearing his body the way you'd wear a coat. "He was a very special man," it said softly. "Our dear George." "He was," I said, keeping the knife up even though my hands trembled. "He was a good man." It laughed, a barking sound that did not belong in George's throat. "Good? Oh, I don't think so." It stopped with the knife point near its neck. It didn't flinch. It didn't blink. "Get out of my house," I said. It shook its head. "All those shiny metals, all that money, he earned them," I said. "He served our country. He was a great man." The smile drained away. Less and less of George showed in its face, like the effort of pretending had grown tiring. "Do you know what he did?" It hissed. "How many were murdered on his word? George never killed anyone. George was stubborn, yes, but gentle. What kind of murderer grows tulips and worries about butterflies?" The thing's face darkened. Before I could react, it moved. Faster than anything that size should move. Its hand snapped out, ripped the knife from my grip like I was a child, and tossed it away as if it weighed nothing. I ran again. The only way out was the back door. I threw myself into the garden, into the wind and rain. The storm hit me like a wall. The apple trees, twisted and beautiful in daylight, turned into skeletal arms in the dark. Branches whipped at my face and snagged my clothes. Thorns tore my legs. The wind tried to shove me to the ground. I looked back. The house was dark. The lights that had been on just moments before were gone. The back door swung on its hinges, banging in the wind. The windows were black, but I could still feel eyes on me, full of hate and heat. I pushed deeper into the garden toward the shed. I hated that shed. I'd always hated it. It sat there like a mistake, a plain wooden box where George kept his trains and tools and whatever private things he didn't want in the house, but it was lit up warm inside, like a beacon. I stumbled to the door, blood running down my legs from the thorns, and I yanked it open and threw myself in. I slammed the door behind me and pressed my back to it, breathing hard, listening for footsteps. Outside, the storm screamed. The shed creaked and groaned as if it might come apart. I looked out the small window toward the house. It was empty. I don't mean it looked empty, I mean I felt it. In an instant, I knew that thing was gone, like a weight leaving the air, like the moment a predator decides it's done playing and slips back into the dark. My breathing slowed a little. I started to breathe through my nose, and the smell hit me. Rot. Thick and sour and unmistakable, like meat left too long in the sun mixed with damp earth. I turned around. George's train layout was still running along the walls. Little engines chugged through tunnels and past tiny brick stations with tiny painted families. It was ridiculous and beautiful, something he'd built with patience and love. Under the layout, his gardening things were crammed in: pots, bags of soil, trowels, cutters, rakes. And on the floor, in the middle of it all, was George. My George? He was lying in an awful twist as if he'd fallen and tried to crawl. His skin had darkened. His face was bloated and blackened. The smell came off him in waves. And even now I can remember it so clearly that it makes my throat tighten. He'd been dead for days. His expression was pure terror, frozen there like he'd seen something in his last moments that his mind couldn't accept. I don't know how long I stood there. I don't know how long I stared. Time stopped meaning anything. Eventually I moved, but everything I did felt unreal. I tried calling the police on my mobile, but the call wouldn't go through. I ran to the house and tried the landline. When I finally got through and gave my name, even while I was screaming and sobbing and saying my husband was dead, I got nothing but a flat apology and a warning not to call again. Then I called Rebecca. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. The call dropped almost immediately. Later, I was told she'd had work early and didn't want to deal with me. That's the kind version. The honest version is, she had already decided I was a nuisance. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drive. My whole body felt like it had been drained. I stayed there until morning, barely aware of time passing until around 6 when I finally got Rebecca to answer. It was a short conversation. She didn't believe me, but she heard enough in my voice to make another call to the police. They came again for another check. I was in a daze when they arrived. It was a different pair this time. A tall, bald black man and a very large, red-faced woman. I hadn't washed. I looked wild, disheveled, panicked. These two at least saw that something was wrong. I barely spoke. I led them through the house and out to the shed like I was sleepwalking. The moment they saw George, everything changed. They locked the place down. More police arrived, an ambulance, the coroner. It felt like half the town invaded my property. People asked questions I couldn't answer. I didn't tell them the truth, not all of it. I knew how it would sound. I'd already seen how easily people turned my fear into a joke. The tall officer questioned me with a voice that was calm and careful, like he was talking to someone standing on the edge of something. "And when did you realize?" he asked. "Last night," I said. I went out to check on him. In the storm, I found him there. "I'm sorry," he said, and I could tell he meant it. "But he's been dead for days. Why didn't you look sooner?" I stared at him and realized the only answer that would make any sense to them was a lie that made me look broken. So I shrugged. "My memory hasn't been right lately," I said. "It's why George told the police to ignore me. I guess I didn't notice his absence." The officer spoke with someone in a suit. Other officers looked at me and then looked away. At some point, the two officers from the day before showed up. They spoke to the tall man in low voices, and all three of them glanced at me again and again. Someone put a cup of tea in my hands. It had 2 sugars. I didn't argue. I just held it, numb. It didn't take long before they took me away. They were very polite when they put me in a cell overnight, like kindness could cover what they were doing. The cell smelled of urine. I sat on the hard bench and tried not to think about the shed, or George's face, or the voice in the bed whispering that it had killed him. After that, I ended up here. They investigated, of course. They treated it like a possible murder. Naturally, I was the first suspect. Then they looked at terror groups and extremists and anyone who might have wanted to hurt a retired officer with medals. In the end, they said George died of natural causes. Or at least they said there was no clear cause anyone could find. No poison, no obvious injury, just a dead man who had been lying in a shed for days while his wife lived in the house with something wearing his face. I know what happened, even if no one else will say it out loud. I know he was murdered by whatever he brought back from those God-forsaken wars. Not a person, not something that knew exactly how to use his life against him. Something that could smile his smile and speak in his voice and stand in front of police officers and make them pity me. So they put me in a mental hospital. Apparently, any woman who doesn't notice her husband has been dead for days is clearly insane, incapable, useless. Useless. That's what Rebecca said when she came to visit. I still don't know where I went wrong raising her. There was no love in her face. She walked in, looked at me like she'd stepped in something unpleasant, and shook her head with disgust and anger. I don't know if she thinks I killed her father or if she thinks I simply failed him. That I should have saved him. That I should have known that I should have done something sooner. Her words were short. Her tone even shorter. "I never want to look at you again," she said. Maybe I deserve it. I don't know. All I know is that I lived in a house with something that wore my husband's face, and I watched the world believe it instead of me. And now it's written down what really happened. But even with the words sitting here in front of me, I still don't know what to do with the truth when no one else will hold it. Story 4. Last week, I went stargazing for the first time in my life. I'd never been the kind of person who cared much about stars or space. If I'm being honest, whenever people started talking about galaxies and constellations, my mind usually drifted somewhere else. But my friend kept bringing it up. He had this calm, sure way of talking about it, like it wasn't just a hobby. He said it could change your perspective on life. I laughed when he said that because it sounded like something you'd read on a quote page, not something you'd hear from him. Still, he showed me some photos he had taken on other trips, and they were good. Not just nice for a phone good, but the kind of pictures that made the sky look deep and endless. After seeing those, I figured maybe I'd judged it too quickly. It might actually be fun, and I liked the idea of getting a few good shots myself. He had most of the gear already because he'd done this before. A tent, the main camera equipment, a tripod, some supplies. There were a few things missing, and I brought those because I didn't want to feel like I was just tagging along. I brought extra batteries, a couple of flashlights, and some food, and I even packed a small cup and a plastic container because I always like to have backups for drinks and leftovers. It felt normal at the time, like we were just planning a simple overnight hike with a reward at the top. On the day we left, he told me there was a particular spot he'd always wanted to visit. He said it was popular with other stargazers, the serious ones, because there was a place up there where the sky looked different. He didn't mean different like less light pollution, though he mentioned that too. He meant different like it was cleaner, clearer, almost closer. He said the view was unlike anything you'd find anywhere else. The way he said it made it sound like he'd been thinking about this spot for a long time, like it had been calling him. On the drive, I asked him what started this whole interest. We'd been friends most of our lives, and I knew him well. He wasn't really the patient type. He wasn't the kind of person who liked sitting still and quietly taking in scenery. If he stared out a window, it was usually because he was bored. He didn't strike me as someone who would spend hours looking at the sky for something meaningful. He smiled a little at my question, but it wasn't his usual smile. It looked private, like he was keeping a secret even while he talked. He told me stargazing was a special hobby, one that meant nothing to most people but everything to a few. Then he corrected himself like he wanted to be precise. He didn't say a few, he said the right people. I remember the exact phrase because it made my skin tighten in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. His voice had this careful respect in it, like he was talking about some rule you weren't supposed to break. It left a bad taste in my mouth, but I told myself I was being dramatic. People get weird about things they love. Maybe this was just his way of sounding deep. The drive took maybe an hour, maybe two. I honestly can't tell you now because the time blurred together. He never really told me where we were going. I assumed he had a trail or a park in mind, something with a marked route and maybe other people around. I trusted him because I always had. But when we finally pulled in, that trust started slipping. The place felt abandoned, not like a closed parking lot or a quiet trailhead. It felt like the world had decided not to use that land anymore. There were no other cars, no distant voices, no glow from another camp. Even the trees looked still. I know that sounds strange because trees don't move much unless the wind pushes them, but that's the thing. There was wind, yet it didn't feel alive. It moved in slow, soft ways like it was being careful. I stepped out of the car and listened. Usually you hear something even in the middle of nowhere. Bugs, birds, something rustling. But there was nothing. It was the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. The hair on my arms lifted, and I asked my friend if he was sure this was the right place. I told him it didn't feel right. It felt empty. He didn't argue with me. He didn't reassure me in the normal way either. He just looked up toward the mountain like he was checking something only he could see, and he said, "You mustn't be afraid to ascend. Very few can do it." If anything, it made my stomach drop. It sounded like a line from a book, like something memorized and repeated. I tried to laugh it off, but my laugh came out thin. We grabbed our gear and started hiking. The trail wasn't as steep as I expected. It was a steady incline, gradual enough that it felt like the mountain was letting us come up, rather than forcing us to fight our way. The path was clear, almost too clear, like someone had taken care of it even though the place seemed deserted. The air was cool, and at first I thought the quiet might actually be peaceful. The climb itself wasn't hard. It was almost pleasant. But the higher we got, the stranger it felt. The silence didn't break. No animal sounds, no sudden bird flight, nothing. The only thing I could hear was the wind, and even that got calmer the farther we went. You'd expect the wind to pick up on a mountain, especially as you climb. Instead, it softened, like someone was slowly turning down the volume of the world. At some point, I stopped paying attention to time. I couldn't tell you how long we'd been walking. I'd glance at my phone and then forget the number. I'd think we must be close to a good resting point. But the trail kept going. My friend didn't talk much. Actually, he barely spoke at all. He also kept drifting farther ahead of me, not so far that I lost sight of him, but far enough that a normal conversation would have required shouting. It felt intentional, like he didn't want my voice following him. When the sun began to set, he finally stopped and said we should make camp. We were about halfway up. We could see enough of the slope above us to know we had more to climb tomorrow, but it made sense to rest. We set up the tent and organized our packs while the sky changed color. The sun went down slowly, painting the clouds in dull orange and fading pink, and then that light disappeared behind the mountain like someone closing a curtain. After we finished setting up, we ate dinner. For a while, it almost felt normal again. We talked about life, about stupid things from school, about people we used to know. We cracked a few jokes. It reminded me of old times when we were younger and nothing felt complicated. The quiet mountain faded into the background. The strange drive, the empty trailhead, his weird words, all of it loosened its grip on my mind. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask him something I'd been thinking about. I asked what got him into climbing in the first place. It seemed like a fair question, and I hoped his answer would pull things back into the normal world. He told me it started with an old friend he met at university. He said there was a society they both joined, and through that group he got into stargazing. He said it like it was a normal club at first, but his eyes didn't match his tone. There was a shine in them like the memory was bright in a way he missed too much. He said that after university ended, he and that friend drifted apart, and he doesn't see him anymore. The way he said drifted apart didn't sound like a normal falling out. It sounded like someone being pulled away by a current. And even though he said he doesn't see him anymore, he spoke like he expected to see him again soon, like it was just a matter of time. That made me ask if he had plans to meet up with him again, maybe catch up, grab a drink, something simple. He didn't answer. He didn't even react the way you normally would when someone asks you a question. He just stared at the mountain for a long moment, then looked down at his hands like he'd forgotten I was there. After that, the conversation died again, and I felt stupid for pushing. To pass time, I pulled out the map and started planning the route with him. Or at least I tried. He'd point to areas without really explaining why. He'd nod without looking closely. It was like he didn't need the map, like the route was already in him. Still, I kept studying it because focusing on something practical helped keep the nervous thoughts away. While I was doing that, I noticed him take out a flask. It wasn't fancy, just a metal flask he kept in his bag. He unscrewed the top and poured himself a drink. The liquid was dark red. In the dim light, it almost looked like wine, but thicker. I watched him for a moment without meaning to. Something about the way he held it, careful and almost respectful, made me pause. He took a slow sip, like he was tasting something important. I asked him what he was drinking. He didn't answer right away. He took another long drink before he looked at me. Then he said it was something that was good for your head while climbing. That was his exact wording, and it felt odd. Not good for energy or helps you sleep. Good for your head. When I asked if I could try some, he suddenly got defensive. His shoulders tightened, and he said I wouldn't like it. I teased him a little because that's what friends do. But he didn't laugh. He just put the flask away like it was something he didn't want me thinking about. A little while after that, he went to sleep. I lay awake. The tent felt too small, and the silence felt pressed up against the fabric like it was waiting. My thoughts wouldn't settle. Where were we, really? Why was it so quiet? Why did he talk like this place meant something beyond stargazing? What made this mountain so special it felt like I'd been brought into the middle of a story without being told the beginning? I tried to talk myself down. I told myself I was overthinking because it was my first time doing something like this. New places can feel strange at night. Mountains can feel empty. Maybe my friend was just being dramatic because he was excited. I repeated that to myself until the words lost meaning. I turned my head and looked at him. He was asleep, breathing slowly. Next to him was his bag. The top was open slightly, and I could see the flask sticking out. I stared at it for a long time. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought if I tasted what he drank, I'd understand why he was acting so weird. Maybe I just wanted something to take the edge off so I could finally sleep. I told myself I'd only take a little, just enough to relax. It couldn't hurt, right? So I leaned over quietly and pulled the flask free. I poured a bit into my cup. The smell hit me immediately, and it was nothing like I expected. It wasn't like wine or whiskey. It smelled like herbs, like every herb and spice you can imagine mixed together into one strong, sharp scent. It was strange, but not unpleasant. It was almost inviting, like the smell was promising something. It made my mouth water, which surprised me. I took a sip. The taste was unreal. It wasn't just good. It felt wrong that something could taste that perfect. It was smoother than anything I'd ever had and sweeter than it should have been without being sticky. It didn't burn going down. It didn't feel heavy. It felt clean, like it was sliding straight into me without resistance. The warmth spread through my chest, and a calm came over me so fast it scared me. I took another sip before I even realized I was doing it. After that, the tent didn't feel small anymore. The silence didn't feel threatening. My thoughts started drifting in a way that wasn't quite sleep, but wasn't quite awake either. Images began to form behind my eyes, bright and clear. I started thinking about angels, not in the casual way you think about them in stories, but in a serious way, like they were real and close and just out of sight. I pictured wings, light, something holy and perfect. I couldn't stop. The more I tried to shift my focus, the more my mind returned to the same idea, like it had found the only thing that mattered. I lay there all night with a vivid image of an angel in my head. It felt like I was being shown something. I didn't sleep. I just stared into the dark and held that image. And the strangest part was that it didn't feel scary. It felt beautiful. I kept thinking how incredible it would be to see one in person. When morning came, I didn't feel tired the way I should have. I felt light, almost excited. We packed up camp and continued climbing. I could see the peak now, or at least what looked like the top. There was a wide, flat area up there, and I assumed that was where we'd set up for the night and do the stargazing properly. I tried talking to my friend as we walked, but it was like he couldn't hear me. I asked him something. I don't even remember what it was, and he didn't respond. I repeated myself louder, thinking maybe the wind stole my words, but there was no wind. He still didn't answer. He just kept moving, steady and focused, his eyes fixed upward. At one point, I realized he was whispering to himself. I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like he was reciting something under his breath, something practiced. I told myself he was just exhausted, that maybe he was counting steps or trying to keep his breathing steady. But the truth is, it didn't sound like that. It sounded like prayer. We reached the top around 6, I think. The time felt slippery, but the light in the sky suggested early evening. The flat area was bigger than I expected, like a platform carved out of the mountain. There was enough room for more than one tent, enough room for a group to gather. That made me uneasy, because we hadn't seen anyone else on the trail. Not a single person. We set up the tent again and laid out the equipment. Then we waited for the sky to get darker. The hours stretched. There was nothing to do but sit, drink water, and watch the light fade. The silence up there was even deeper than it was halfway up. It felt like the top of the mountain was holding its breath. During the wait, my friend started talking again. He seemed almost normal for a while. We didn't talk about anything important, just random things to pass the time. He laughed at a joke I made, but then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. As he laughed, he kept wiping his mouth. At first I thought he spilled something, but then I saw it clearly. He was drooling. Not a little either. It was like his mouth wouldn't stop producing saliva. He'd wipe it with the back of his hand, laugh again, and then wipe again. I made fun of him for it because I didn't know what else to do, and he didn't seem embarrassed. He didn't even seem aware of it. When it got dark enough, we finally started stargazing. And I can't deny it, the sky was beautiful. I'd seen photos before and I'd seen stars from my backyard, but this was different. Up there, the sky didn't look like a flat black sheet with dots. It looked deep. The stars looked layered, like there were worlds behind them. It felt like if you stared long enough, you could fall upward. I remember thinking my friend had been right. I remember thinking maybe this really could change how you see life. Then something happened that I still struggle to explain in a normal way. I saw an angel. It came down from the stars above us, and as it moved, the air seemed to change. It wasn't like a bird flying. It wasn't like anything with weight. It floated, held up by wings that stretched wider than the mind can comfortably imagine. The wings were so wide they made me think of skyscrapers, and they weren't feathered the way paintings show. They were covered in shining scales, endless layers of them, catching the starlight. The color wasn't something I can name. It wasn't just silver or white. It was like a color that didn't belong to this world. Its eyes were huge and black, like smooth stones, and they reflected the moonlight in a way that made them look wet. They didn't blink. They didn't move from us. The gaze felt heavy, like standing under a spotlight you didn't ask for. When the angel spoke, the sound didn't just go into my ears, it went into my chest. The voice was so beautiful it hurt. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's the truth. It made my throat tighten and my eyes water. Even now, I can remember it too clearly, like it burned itself into my hearing and never left. My friend stood beside me, staring up like this was exactly what he'd come for. He looked calm, he looked ready. Then a thin, long appendage appeared from the angel's chest. It moved smoothly, like it was part of the angel's body, and it reached down toward my friend. It wrapped around him and lifted him off the ground. He didn't fight. He didn't struggle. He started screaming, but it wasn't a scream of fear. It was joy, pure joy, loud and uncontrolled, like a person who finally got the thing they'd been waiting for. The sound of it made my heart race. I remember my hands shaking, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. As my friend rose, the angel opened a path in the air for him. It wasn't a door the way we think of doors. It was more like the sky split open. A cavern appeared, a hole deeper than anything natural. It was darkness, but not normal darkness. It was black in a way that seemed to eat the light around it. It didn't just sit there, it drank the world. Looking into it made me feel dizzy, like my eyes couldn't focus because there was nothing to hold on to. I remember thinking it felt deeper than the Mariana Trench. That's the only comparison my mind could grab, even though it didn't really fit. This wasn't an ocean depth. This was something else, a place that wasn't meant to be measured. My friend was carried toward that opening, still screaming with happiness, and then he was gone, just swallowed by that black path, like it had been waiting for him all along. I stood there frozen, staring at where he disappeared, and my mind tried to catch up. I should have screamed. I should have run. I should have begged for help. But instead, all I felt was longing. It was like the drink from the flask had planted something in me, and now it was blooming. The angel remained hovering above the mountain for a moment, and then it released a thick red liquid from its mouth. It didn't fall straight down like you'd expect. It moved with purpose. It flew diagonally through the air as if the liquid knew where it wanted to go. It landed on the mountain in front of me, pooling there without soaking into the ground the way water would. It sat on the rock like a gift. Without even thinking, I grabbed my flask and my plastic container. I dumped out what was inside as fast as I could. I hadn't really eaten since I first tasted that drink anyway. Food seemed pointless now, like it belonged to some other life. I rushed forward and filled both containers with the thick red liquid. My hands moved fast and sure. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Then, just like that, the angel left. It rose back into the sky, back toward the stars, and the air slowly returned to normal. The silence came back, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, like the mountain was satisfied. I stood there for a long time, holding my filled containers, looking up at the place where the angel had disappeared. I knew, with a certainty that didn't feel like my own, that it would return. The next morning, I packed my things and left the mountain. I didn't search for my friend. I didn't call out his name. A part of me knew there was no point. Another part of me believed he was exactly where he wanted to be. As I hiked down, the world slowly became noisier again. I started hearing wind the normal way. I started hearing distant birds. It was like life returned in layers the farther I got from the peak. When I reached my car, I loaded everything in the trunk and sat there for a while, hands on the steering wheel, staring ahead. If you had asked me then if it was a good trip, I would have said yes, and I still would. It was a nice trip. I appreciate my friend for taking me stargazing because it's something I never would have done on my own. But I know one thing for sure. It's something I will do again. Ever since that night, I've been trying to find someone else I can take to that spot. I don't talk about it the way I'm talking about it now. I keep it casual. I say it's a great view, a perfect place for photos, a hidden gem. People like the idea of hidden places. They like the idea of doing something special. But the truth is, the spot is special in ways that are hard to explain without sounding insane. It isn't just the stars. It's what comes down from them and what it offers to the right people. I know I'll find someone, maybe a coworker, maybe a friend of a friend, someone curious, someone willing to take a hike and spend a night under the sky. And one day I'll go back up there. One day I'll stand on that flat peak again and wait. Since that day, I can't stop thinking about the angel. I think about its wings and its voice and the way it looked at us like it already knew our names. I think about my friend and how happy he was when he was lifted from the ground like he was being chosen. And more than anything, I think about that endless place, that dark path that opened like a promise. I want to see it again. I want to hear that voice again. I want to feel that pull again, that certainty that there is something beyond this life that is waiting, and that it is beautiful. At night, when everything is quiet, I lie in bed and think about it until I start laughing to myself. Not because it's funny, but because the idea fills me with a kind of excited joy I can't explain. It keeps me awake, giggling softly in the dark, staring up at my ceiling as if it might open the same way the sky did, as if the angel might return for me too. Story 5. This is my first time in a big city. It's also the first time I've ever been away from home on my own. I came here thinking it would be a small taste of independence, even if it was only for a few days. I'm supposed to take my board exam in 2 days, but right now all I can think is that I want to go home. I moved in on Monday. I rented a small room in a boarding house owned by a couple who seemed genuinely kind. They were the type of people who smiled with their whole faces, who asked where I was from and if I'd eaten yet. On my first night, they invited me to join them for dinner. I said no because I didn't want to be a burden, and because I was nervous and tired from travel. They didn't seem offended. They just told me to let them know if I needed anything. There are other people staying here too, 4 dormers plus me. We share space, we share walls, and that means we share sounds. It also means that if something goes wrong, you don't have one clear person to blame. You have a list of strangers you barely know, and your mind starts building stories about every one of them. At first, I thought the house would be perfect for studying. It's old but tidy, quiet most of the time, and the owners keep things in order. My room is small, but it has what I need. A bed, A desk, a chair, a narrow closet, and a door that doesn't lock from the inside as well as I'd like. The window faces the side of the building where there's a narrow gap between this house and the next one. When I first saw that gap, I didn't think anything of it. It looked too tight for anyone to squeeze through. Now I can't stop thinking about it. The first night passed normally. I showered, ate something quick, and reviewed my notes until my eyes blurred. I fell asleep with my phone charging beside me and my exam schedule open on the desk. The second night was when it started. It was around 9 in the evening. Not late at all. I was still reading, highlighting lines, trying to calm my nerves by focusing on the material. Then I got that feeling. If you've ever had someone stare at you for too long, you know what I mean. It's not a sound, it's not a touch. It's like your skin notices before your brain does, like something is pressing against you from across a room. My shoulders tightened. The back of my neck felt hot. I stopped reading and slowly looked up. I scanned the room, the desk, the closet, the corner by the door, the little shadowed space under the bed. I even looked at the window, half expecting to see a face outside, even though that didn't make sense on the second floor. I saw nothing. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was stressed. I was in a new city. I was sleeping in a strange place. I shoved the feeling down the way you swallow fear when you don't want to admit it's there. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would reset me. The third night got worse. I had just turned the lights off when I heard a sound, a faint scratching, slow and uneven, like nails dragging lightly over wood. At first, I thought it was outside, branches brushing the wall, or maybe pipes shifting in an old house. I held my breath and listened harder. It wasn't coming from the bathroom. It wasn't coming from the door. It wasn't coming from the window. It stopped for a few seconds, and I almost laughed at myself. I thought maybe it was coming from someone else's room, the sound traveling through the floor. Old houses make noises. People shift in bed. Mice and rats exist. None of it had to mean anything. Then the scratching started again, and this time it was unmistakable. It was coming from under my bed. Every part of me went tight. My mouth went dry so fast my tongue felt thick. I didn't want to lean over and look. I didn't want to turn on the flashlight and see something that would make it real. For a few seconds, I just lay there, frozen, listening, trying to force my brain into a normal explanation. Rats, I told myself. It has to be rats. But the sound didn't match what I imagined rats would sound like. It wasn't scurrying. It wasn't quick. It sounded deliberate, like someone testing the underside of the bed frame with a fingernail, slow enough to show they had time. I bolted up and grabbed my phone. The light from the screen made the room feel smaller, and in that light the shadows under the bed looked thick and crowded. I didn't check under there. I couldn't. Instead, I ran out of my room and went straight to the owners. I must have looked crazy, hair messy, breathing too fast, phone in my hand like a weapon. They came back with me, calm but concerned, and checked the room. One of them knelt and looked under the bed. The other checked the closet, then the window. They found nothing. They told me it might just be rats. The house is old, they said. There are always noises. They said it kindly, like they were trying to help me feel normal again. And I wanted to believe them. I went back to bed with the lights on for a while. I kept my feet pulled up under the blanket like I was a child. I stared at the edge of the bed, waiting for the scratching to start again, waiting for something to move. Eventually, exhaustion won and I slept, but it wasn't real sleep. It was the kind where you wake up at every little sound, where your dreams feel like warnings. Then came the fourth night. I fell asleep at some point, and I don't know how long I'd been out when it happened. I woke up suddenly because something warm brushed across my face. At first, in that first half second, I thought it was a draft. But it didn't feel like cold air moving through a window crack. It was warm, hot, even, like breath, like someone exhaling right onto my skin. Someone was inside my room. I went perfectly still. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't move my hands. I didn't even swallow. My mind was screaming at me to sit up, to reach for my phone, to run, but my body chose something else. It chose survival by pretending. I kept my breathing shallow, as quiet as I could manage. I waited for the next thing. The grab, the weight on the mattress, the sound of feet on the floor. Anything that would confirm I wasn't imagining it. Nothing happened. The warm air stopped. The room went silent again. Minutes passed. My muscles began to ache from holding so still. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I wanted to open my eyes so badly, but I was terrified of what I would see if I did. Finally, I gathered enough courage to move my hand slowly toward the phone on my bedside table. I turned the screen on and used the light, not daring to turn on the lamp. The room looked empty. No shadow by the door. No figure by the desk. No shape by the closet. Nothing. And that's when fear turned into anger. I jumped out of bed and stormed into the hallway. I banged on the doors of the other dormers, hard enough that my knuckles hurt. I demanded they come out. I was convinced one of them was messing with me, playing some sick prank because I was the new person, the outsider, the easy target. They came out half asleep, confused, irritated. One of them looked genuinely scared by how furious I was. Another got angry right back, telling me I couldn't just wake people up like that. They all swore they hadn't been in my room. They swore they hadn't done anything. Their faces looked tired and offended, not guilty. That didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. Because if it wasn't them, then who was it? Tonight is my 5th night. I already decided I'm leaving. I don't care if I lose money. I don't care if I have to drag my suitcase through the rain to find a cheap hotel. I would rather sleep on a bus station bench than in that room again. I also decided I'm calling the police. I was trying to distract myself in the kitchen earlier, sitting at the table with my phone in my hand, pretending I was just another board exam taker doing normal stressed-out scrolling. I remembered I had a short video I recorded 5 days ago before I left home. It was nothing important, just something silly I meant to show a friend later. I figured watching it might calm me down, remind me of normal life. So I opened my gallery and scrolled down past the most recent pictures, past the screenshots of my notes, past the photo of my exam permit. That's when I saw images I don't remember taking. They were dated 4 days ago. 3 photos, all taken from a narrow angle like the camera was squeezed into a thin space. Each photo showed my room from the doorway, but not the way someone would normally take a picture. It looked like the phone had been held between the opening of my door, peeking in through a crack. My mouth went dry again. My fingers started to sweat so much I almost dropped the phone. I swiped to the next set of images. More pictures of my room, but these were taken from under my bed. The first one showed the room empty. The second showed me standing by the door, like someone was waiting for me to step inside. The third was just my foot, close to the edge of the mattress, as if the person under the bed had lifted the phone at the last second to catch proof that they were right there while I was right there too. I felt something cold spread through my chest, like my body was trying to shut down to protect itself. Then I kept swiping because my thumb wouldn't stop even though my brain wanted to. The next 3 photos were from last night. They were taken beside my bed. The first was from the foot of the bed, angled upward like whoever took it was standing and looking down at me. The second was closer by my bedside table. The third was the closest of all. In that third picture, there was a hand resting on my face. That alone should have been the worst part. The fact that a stranger touched me while I slept and took a photo to prove it. But the worst part was me. My eyes were open, wide open. Not sleepy open, not half-dreaming open. They looked terrified, stretched wide, staring straight at the camera, staring straight at whoever was holding the phone. I don't remember that. I don't remember waking up. I don't remember seeing anyone. I don't remember a flash of light or the click of a camera or anything. But my face in the photo shows I was awake enough to be scared. Just a minute ago, while I was still staring at that picture, my phone pinged with a notification. Someone sent me an image. It was a photo of me, right now, sitting at the kitchen table. The angle is wrong in a way I can't explain without shaking. It's taken through a thin crack, from low and close to the door of my room, like someone is standing inside my room with the lights off, holding a phone up to the gap, watching me in the kitchen. I can feel them staring at me through that crack. I'm too scared to turn my head and confirm it. I'm too scared that if I look, I'll actually see an eye or a smile or nothing at all. But I know they're there, and I don't think I'm going to make it 2 more days to that exam.